Echo. Detail left, hey!
1, 2!
Detail right, hey!
1, 2!
Detail parade, hey!
Hi!
Attend, head!
Hi!
Left, hey!
1, 2!
Right, hey!
1, 2!
At ease, relax.
Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of July 29th, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a tale of a concert boat, a follow-up on my recent trio section conversation about that SAT word, hegemony, a story about a hat, and dispatches from the Westfield Bureau. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. This is the first episode of the BandWagon podcast that coincides with my annual 4 or 5 days on the instructional staff of the George N. Parks Drum Major Academy. For quite a while, I've been brainstorming about what sort of episode this one would be. How much time should I spend bending your ear about this particular student leadership clinic? Should I focus on the work, or the wonderful people I get to teach with, or the practical jokes? So many decisions. And so many stories. I mean, I've worked this clinic before. All kinds of things happen, some of them completely predictable and others a complete surprise, but they become stories for the ages. I don't know why it happens that way, but it always does. So those stories will all come out, a few this week and some in the next few podcast episodes. If you're more interested in the seated band world than you are in the marching arts, don't fret. DMA is a little bit about band and a whole lot about life. So, refill the water jugs on the sideline, and let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Cullowhee, North Carolina. Credit to the reporting of WLOS Channel 13 in Asheville, North Carolina. Western Carolina University has named Matt Henley as interim director of its Pride of the Mountains marching band. The appointment comes not quite a week after the announcement that former director Jack Eady Jr. was taking a teaching position at the University of Georgia. Henley earned both his bachelor's and master's degree in music at Western Carolina and has been assistant director of athletic bands there for the past several years. In addition to his Western Carolina teaching duties, Henley composes, arranges, adjudicates, and is a prominent percussion clinician. In a press release, Western Carolina University said that Henley will be an interim director for this season while a national search for a permanent director takes place. Dateline, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Credit to the reporting and writing of Jeremy Reynolds at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. On July 4th, Robert Boudreau died at his home in Mars, a borough of southern Butler County near Pittsburgh, of a brain tumor. He was 97 years old. Who was Robert Boudreau? In 1971, Time magazine wrote that, quote, "There is no greater innovative force in American music than Robert Boudreau." Perhaps most famously, he designed a concert boat. I shall explain. Born on a chicken farm in Massachusetts in April 1927, Boudreau took up trumpet at an early age. His playing helped him attend Boston University and then the Juilliard School in New York City. After playing in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, Boudreau returned to Pittsburgh, teaching at Duquesne University before launching his own ensemble and touring globally. In his 20s, Boudreau raised funds to resurrect a coal barge that was marooned near Neville Island and to turn it into a concert boat named Point Counterpoint 1. Yes, 1. Hold that thought, there was another. Philadelphia-based architect Louis Kahn, who had helped design the first boat, agreed to design the next one, Point Counterpoint 2, for the American Bicentennial celebration in 1976. That second boat made a concert tour of western Pennsylvania's rivers with the American Wind Symphony Orchestra on board and performing. That was when Boudreau became the boat's captain. He took over when the original captain quit. Boudreau apparently went through lots of captains. In the decades that followed, Boudreau took the ship to destinations including France, Jamaica, Cuba, and Russia. The aforementioned American Wind Symphony Orchestra was an ensemble made up mostly of college-age musicians. Boudreau refused to call it a band, partly because some famous composers at the time didn't want to write music for band. So he created a new sort of sound using only instruments traditionally found in a symphony orchestra: flutes, oboes, trumpets, horns, and the like, without saxophones or other instruments found in bands. Boudreau conducted the AWSO's first concert in 1957 on the banks of the Allegheny River. He conducted the AWSO aboard Point Counterpoint 2 at the Tall Ships Ceremony at the Statue of Liberty in 1986. The orchestra played the national anthem of each ship as it passed by the statue. The AWSO has long since disbanded, but its legacy lives on in the more than 400 compositions that Boudreau commissioned especially for the ensemble. Meanwhile, Point Counterpoint 2 sat inactive for many years after the AWSO finished touring. In 2017, after the AWSO's 60th anniversary tour and final performance, cellist Yo-Yo Ma, who was a friend of Boudreau's, wrote that the ship, quote, sails as a powerful living testament to American creativity and to the elemental role that culture plays in human life. Currently, the ship is docked for repairs in North Carolina, following an ill-fated voyage to Florida, where it was intended to become a floating arts center. Funding for that project fell through, but there are now plans to convert Point Counterpoint 2 into an arts center in Philadelphia. The Boudreau family is planning to hold a memorial concert on September 22nd that will bring back alumni from the American Wind Symphony Orchestra to perform music in a renovated barn owned by the AWSO north of Pittsburgh. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. After this quick break, more BandWagon. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, over the course of these first 22 podcast episodes, both my interview subject and I have occasionally made passing references to our experiences as students, or collegiate assistants, or professional instructors of the George N. Parks Drum Major Academy. And, as I suggested at the top of this episode, it's about time I just got it all out in the open. Well, a lot of it anyway. As for the answer to the question, what is DMA anyway? It was founded in 1973 by a fellow named George N. Parks, which you may have guessed, who at the time was himself not much older than the students he was aiming to teach. Specifically, as he put it, he was trying to help train high school band people who were about to be the drum majors, student leaders of their high school bands, in no small part by pointing out the mistakes he had made as a very young drum major, so that future high school drum majors wouldn't make those mistakes themselves. Ever since then, obviously with the exception of the 2020 COVID summer, these DMA summer clinics have happened all over the country, from New England to the Carolinas to the upper Midwest to the Rockies to Texas and California. Literally tens of thousands of high school drum majors and other student band leaders have come through the doors, spent 4 or 5 days learning how to conduct music, learning how to teach, and learning about concepts of peer leadership that can make their band leadership experiences positive ones. As Mr. Parks used to say, DMA is a little bit about band and a whole lot about life. The staff is made up of band directors, professional musicians, and other experienced purveyors of the marching arts, and each clinic also features a group of current collegiate drum majors and marching musicians who assist the professional staff and take the opportunity to learn themselves, the better to improve their performance when they get back to school and back to their bands. They're called the Impact Team. The IMPACT acronym, created by Mr. Parks in his inimitable way, stands for Intensely Motivated Power and Class Team. To those of us who got to experience him before he passed away in the fall of 2010, that IMPACT name is so George. I've been a member of the professional staff since the summer of 1999, helping to teach marching techniques and educational procedures and basic conducting skills and a little bit of showmanship via my trusty twirling mace. And what has made the experience extra special for me, honestly, has been, well, a number of things. First, and you would think foremost, is of course the opportunity to do what I can to help drum major gonnabes get to a place where they can at least fake being comfortable leading a band of their peers. Also, I get to do this alongside, and indeed inspired by, a staff of great teachers, most of whom at this point are both much younger than I am, and the kind of teachers I want to be when I grow up. Most of the professional staff were themselves collegiate Impact Team members at one time, and many Impacts are former DMA students, or vets of the program. There's a whole lot of institutional knowledge flying around your average DMA clinic. And remarkably, and delightfully to me, an eyebrow-raising number of the staff with whom I get to teach every summer were at one time DMA students with whom I worked in the smaller group activities that I led. And there is nothing in the world like the experience of having a former student turn into a colleague and a friend. And that's the remaining thing that has made my DMA experiences so great, and I suspect I'm not alone in thinking this. I'm only half joking when I say that 30% of the reason I do DMA is the work, and 70% of the reason is that while I'm doing that work, I get to hang out with some of the finest, decentest, most good-hearted people I know. I've known a lot of them for 5 or 10 or 20, or in a couple of cases, 35 plus years. There are good reasons why people stay connected like we do for that long. And a lot of us live in places that are far-flung enough that the summer DMA week is the only time all year we'll get to be together in person, and we actively work to make the most of the 4 days we have together. And because of all this, the great, inspiring, and sometimes very silly people, and the particular, curious, unusual kind of curriculum we teach, the stories can be tremendously meaningful or tremendously funny, or both simultaneously. I mean, let's just say that for a certain subset of the population, all it takes to kick loose a memory or to inspire a roll-on-the-floor laughing moment is to say something like Vivaldi's Four Seasons, or inflatable dinosaur costumes, or Belgian paratroopers, or marble muscles, or blue rondo a la Turk, or banner checks, or staff lag. And that environment is what a lot of this episode is going to be full of. Certainly already in this second strain, and then in the trio and the dogfight. So, stand by for references and humor that I'll try my best to explain, and for stories that will need no explanation. All that after a brief break. Okay, let's shift gears and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, well, I don't know exactly how much of a gear shift this is really going to be. Already, I've offered you some idea of one reason why I, as well as many other people, have gone back summer after summer to work this DMA clinic thing. The, perhaps, well, a tiny bit selfish reason? You could read it that way. I don't, but I understand why people might see it as more I-me than we-us, as a great philosopher once put it. The other reason, of course, is the opportunity to help young people who are about to be tossed into the pool of peer leadership. At the end of the last of the small group sessions that I run during a DMA week, I say to the kids in front of me, keep in touch with us. We want to hear how it's all going this fall. If it's going well, brag. We love to hear it. If you're finding challenges, problems to overcome, and you're not quite sure how to approach them, we'd like to be a resource for you beyond just this week. We don't want this to be a case of 4 days and have a nice life. And quite a number of the DMA students over the years have taken me up on that offer. About an equal ratio of humble brags to, what do I do about this moments. Most of them I don't hear from, but I'm not hurt. It's an offer, it's an opportunity, but it's not a requirement. Still, I do wonder how they're all doing, especially the ones that didn't finish up the DMA week looking like they could go tell the president's own a thing or two. There are kids that arrive at DMA looking terrified, and who depart looking still a bit dubious about whether they're up to this challenge. I wrote about one of those in my online blog nearly a decade ago, and I want to bring that story to you, edited a bit, but still as relevant as ever, I think. The blog post was called The Unlikeliest of Heroes. I wrote pretty much this. Marvel Studios has managed to produce a string of movies with some really fine moments in them in the past few years. Over and over again, they've offered the movie-going public some story revelations that caused said public to think, aha, it really has all been leading up to this. Somehow, these movies about inherently silly characters, the giant green rage monster, the not really Norse god, the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist, have all been deftly intertwined, at least within their cinematic universe. Aficionados of the comic book versions of things may need to cool their jets here as, shh, this isn't really the subject of this blog post, but instead, as usual, the author needs a hook, and this time your favorite characters are it. Fun to go back and look at certain scenes again and say, they really were thinking about 6 movies down the road right there. Other scenes are kind of right up in your face, to the point where one could accuse the filmmakers of being ham-handed in their need to make sure you get the point. I'll admit right away, I've got one favorite firmly telegraphed scene. The scene came in the first Captain America film, The First Avenger, which I didn't see in the theaters. I got ambushed by the thing on basic cable. That's how late to that party I was. And by the way, I will happily admit, of all the silly Marvel Comics comic book characters, to my way of thinking, old Cap was the flippin' silliest of them. I'm all for red and blue costumes, rah 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 Superman, but honestly, between the little teeny wing things on the sides of his helmet and what I perceived, rightly or not, as the I can win World War II all by my lonesome vibe, no and no. Sorry. Silly look, don't want to wallow in the jingoistic. Nice artwork, but I think not. So the cinematic universe filmmakers wrote a nice little series of scenes that served as a nod to the classic Captain America look and a reassurance that, well, we're going to try and sand down as much of the silly and cheeseball as we possibly can. In fact, we're going to have Cap react to his own cheesy look his very own self. I'll be honest, I don't know the comic book Captain America origin story well enough to know whether the MCU version was an homage or just a great new idea to link him to the chemistry set experiments that produced a giant green rage monster. Either way, they made the point, sometimes rather heavily but at least earnestly, that Captain America used to be a 98-pound weakling, but he was the 98-pound weakling who had his priorities straight. The firmly telegraphed scene that I like so much is this one. First, a montage of scenes depicting the physical trials that the World War II era U.S. Army is putting 24 or so soldiers through. These soldiers are being considered for participation in the Army's super-secret Super Soldier program. Then the colonel in charge, played by Tommy Lee Jones with gruff charm, like almost every other gruffly charming character that Tommy Lee Jones has ever gruffly and charmingly played, tosses what appears to be a live grenade into the midst of the soldier candidates. They scatter, all of them except for one, the 98-pound weakling called Steve Rogers. Instead, Rogers throws himself on top of it and wildly waves everyone else away. Turns out, it's a dummy grenade. But Rogers is the only one who volunteers to take one for the team. On the grounds of some backwater Army training camp far from the front, he's willing to lay down his life for the rest of his squad. Never mind that amongst that squad is one guy whose personality had already been firmly telegraphed as arrogant, smug, and a genuine bully to everyone in general, and to the scrawny Rogers in particular. Rogers is taken seriously by absolutely nobody there, with the exception of the scientist whose technology is driving the whole super soldier project, who has insisted that Rogers be considered for reasons which no one else in the U.S. military establishment quite understands, but he's a good guy. A few other earlier, firmly telegraphed scenes in The First Avenger have already done their part to build the story point. Steve Rogers is a decent human being. And after Rogers is selected, the scientist puts it to him this way. This is why you were chosen. Because a strong man who has known power all his life, he loses respect for that power. But a weak man, he values his strength and loves compassion. And then he says, whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing, that you must stay who you are. Not a perfect soldier, but a good man. Shortly, I wrote in 2015, I'll be heading out for my annual summer teaching fortnight with the George N. Parks Drum Major Academy. For many reasons, a few of which already have been chronicled hereabouts, I look forward to this experience every year, more than almost any other. One reason has to do with Captain America, or at least the MCU's incarnation of his origin story. Stay with me, it's not nearly as silly as that sounded. In the years in which I've taught at DMA, I've worked with lots of high school seniors and juniors and a few sophomores who arrive at our clinics having been labeled by their high school band directors as drum majors of their bands. Some of them are veterans, they've gone on this ride before, and for the most part, they have a decent idea of what that job entails, what parts of it they've been good at, and what they still need to work out, or what the areas are in which they can refine their performance. Some of those high school seniors, juniors, and a few sophomores are new to the game. Of these, some put on a good game face at the start of the week, some acquire that game face by week's end, and some of them probably clutch the certificate of completion of studies on the way home, still wondering what in the world they've gotten themselves into, or more accurately, knowing very well what they've gotten themselves into, and hoping for a little divine inspiration that will help them through it. It's been fun to see some of the evidence that some of those figured it out. Blessed are the meek, for when they become not meek anymore, their boldness means so much more than that of the people with good game faces. At the end of summer 2014, I experienced a relative torrent of Facebook friend requests from DMA students. Instead of the usual 1 or 2 per summer, there were 15 or 20. It was neat to see the on the bus to our first game selfies, and by season's end, it was fun to read the brief anecdotes about best season ever and see the photos from band banquets and such. And then, not long after I wrote this blog post in 2015, I spotted a Facebook status post authored by one of the students who was in one of my conducting video breakdown rooms in 2014. They were not the strongest conductor. They were not the strongest caller of commands. They were desperately trying to keep up with all the material being thrown at them, but they seemed a genuinely decent person. I saw them again at the final presentation for parents and family and friends, and wondered actively to myself how they would fare. And while I always keep in mind the old can't judge a book by its cover adage, still, by no means did that student fit the standard, typical, average, normal, median drum major look.
I even wondered if they'd been one of those kids who had spent a lot of their life being on the receiving end of the pranks or the jokes or the side-eye looks or even the overt bullying that can happen when adolescents interact unsupervised. I wondered if they were chosen by their director in spite of the skepticism of the rest of the band, deserved or not. I hoped they'd do well, of course, but I didn't know. And an aside, they weren't even one of the DMA students who had friend requested me, but I saw the Facebook post because it was liked by several of the DMA students who had, which was a hallmark of that previous summer's group. All season long, they continually urged each other on. It was very cute, and also more than a little reassuring. That young drum major's Facebook status post went on at great length, as I recall, about things like greatest year of my life, and love my band so much, and grew so much as a person. Well, all right then. By hook or by crook, without necessarily becoming the second coming of Frederick Fennell or the commander of the U.S. Marine Silent Drill Team, although perhaps something clicked after DMA week was done, somehow, some way, they made it work, and they came out the other side victorious. Maybe something happened that was perhaps not quite as dire as throwing themselves on top of what could have been a live grenade, but that had had a very similar effect on the people around them. Maybe they managed to be their band's unlikeliest of heroes. Maybe what they were really meant more ultimately than what they were able to do. And that 2015 story applies perfectly well to last week's DMA session in Westfield. I'm in the 2024 present now. There were indeed plenty of those examples. The other thing that at the end of this DMA week struck me as good to talk about here was this. In this week's second strain, I alluded to the silliness and fun that the instructional staff usually enjoy inflicting on one another, and the sense of family that we appear to be able to create in a very short amount of time. On Monday afternoon, staff gathered on the Westfield State campus, dumped their luggage in their dorm rooms, and headed out to a local pub for supper. In some cases, veteran staff were catching up with other veteran staff, but also there were a number of college band drum majors and members who would be joining our impact team for the first time and knew nobody. So we made sure to introduce ourselves and ask questions very much like my trio section icebreakers. What's your instrument? Where do you do your marching thing? All that stuff. And I said to the 3 or 4 new arrivals who were sitting near me, don't worry. By the end of the week, we're a little family. It'll be like you've known us forever. They looked dubious, but on Friday, as we gathered in a different nearby restaurant to put off the moment when we all had to go our separate ways, wasn't that true? Big and slightly sad hugs as we departed. Not unrelated to this was a conversation I had during the middle of the week with one of my professional staff colleagues, who is not nearly as far removed from her collegiate days as I am. In fact, she marched in college between about 2013 and 2017, and was a DMA student in 2012 as she was headed for her high school senior drum major experience. She said to me that she had watched carefully as, at the beginning of that 2012 clinic week, the DMA staff was formally introduced to all the students. He is a former drum major of the UMass Marching Band. He teaches music in the Uxbridge Public Schools. He arranges for the University of Delaware Fightin' Blue Hen Marching Band, and this is his 14th year on DMA staff. Please welcome, well, me. And as all those staff intros were happening, the staff was standing up front, smiling and laughing at the occasional in-joke, and were applauding just as enthusiastically for each introduced staff member as the kids had been instructed to do. And then at the end of that 2012 week, there was a moment when the whole staff was bidden to come to the front of the lecture hall, and then everyone, staff and students, had put arms around each other and swayed and sung along with a recording of an honestly rather corny little song that nonetheless spoke eloquently about good friends being friends forever, even if they won't get to see each other much, or maybe at all, in the future. And during that stretch of time, in spite of the melancholy earnestness of the song lyrics, the staff was still smiling and joking with each other, and at a certain moment partway through the song, they always broke out into a kick line, except instead of high kicks, it was gentle toe taps on the floor, left and right and left and right. And even the DMA kids who were a bit teary because it was the end of an intense and wonderful week kind of chuckled at that. And my friend in 2012 had watched all that, she told me, with a sense of, do I want to call it constructive envy? Her thought was, here's a group of people who obviously just love being with each other and having a grand time, at the same time as they were all very focused on teaching their curriculum well and tending to their students. It had been, she said, very attractive to look at, and also, how can I get that? Can I get my band to be that way? Or at the very least my band's student staff? And one day it would be great to get to be in that DMA staff group and experience that camaraderie, wouldn't it? The answer to that last question, as you will have guessed, is a resounding yes. She and I have been on DMA staff together since she became an Impact team member and then a professional staff member. And you know, I have to think hard about when that was, because it seems like I've been watching her teach brilliantly and be one of the snarkiest, silliest, most fun DMA people I know for a longer time than just 9 years, which is in fact how long it's been. Anyway, dear listener, I'm sure you'll hear me speak of this little student leadership project again in future episodes. And if you didn't before, now you'll know why I'm so enthusiastic about going on and on about it. It's a little bit about band and a whole lot about life. And it's a good old time. And just like band, if it's not fun, there's something wrong. Okay, after this brief fermata, I will talk just a bit more about one more thing that happened this week in the Drum Major Academy world. Thanks so much for staying with me. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is a DMA postscript, a psychological profile, and a marketing seminar all rolled into one. One of the many activities I have endeavored to flash learn during the planning and making of this podcast, which in the before times I had not really thought about in a way that related to me actually carrying that activity out, has been marketing. Advertising, drumming up business, if you'll pardon the expression, tooting my own horn, waving a big flag. Here endeth the band-related figures of speech. But my marketing campaign so far has been largely focused on social media PR, the occasional flyer tacked to a bulletin board at my church gig, and my encouragement of listeners verbally to pass this podcast on to people they know. So, not exactly an advertising blitz. Given all that, the number of people who have downloaded episodes since the beginning of March is kind of impressive. I've been alerted to some other marketing ideas, either by watching videos of all those YouTubers who just know that they can help me make a better podcast, or by listening to as many podcasts as I do and noting their tactics. Those ideas have included live episode recordings, appearances at industry conventions, vendor booths in exhibition halls, which sounds like a song from Les Mis, and partnerships with local music stores, that sort of thing. Oh, and merch. Definitely merch. I haven't pursued that angle yet, although I did have a fleeting thought about it at one point a few weeks ago. Certainly, there are companies out there who could help with producing trinkets and such with the podcast name all over them, and maybe with some catchphrases too. Heaven knows I got those. Here comes the dogfight. Hey, maybe that one would work. And certainly there are podcasts out there whose websites have a little merchandise tab where with a single click you can browse pages and pages of shirts and mugs and bumper stickers and hoodies and paperweights and hats, which is the impetus for the following little DMA Week postscript. From the DMA clinic that was held in central New Jersey the week before the Westfield location fired up, I was sent a photo of one of the staff members wearing a baseball cap with lettering on the front that looked suspiciously like the logo of this podcast. BandWagon with Rob Hammerton, in fonts that were dangerously close to my obscure font choices. Green cap, white lettering, basically the color scheme of the branding that you've seen. To paraphrase the little kid voice at the end of every episode of The X-Files, I didn't make that. No, but that particular staff member did. It's a one-off, or actually a two-off, since that staff member also sent me my very own BandWagon cap. And yes, word got out, and immediately a couple of dear listeners leapt onto the social medias to express thoughts along the lines of, "Want one?" To which I'm forced to say, they're out of stock, because they were never in stock to begin with. There have been a handful of staff folks of my acquaintance in my time with DMA who have been liable to do such a thing, to engage in devious arts and crafts projects like this. Let's just say that I was simultaneously touched, humbled, mightily amused, and given a kick in the backside. Okay, let me go away and spend some time going a bit deeper down this merchandise-focused, band-related internet rabbit hole of the week. All right. And as an aside, if you know me, you know, I'm not exactly the sort of person who is terribly comfortable with seeing his name plastered to anything, poster, beer can holder, hat. Nonetheless, yes, I did name this podcast BandWagon with Rob Hammerton. This is a legitimate point. Can't really get around that. So, okay, dear listener, time for you to get on the podcast board of directors. Help me make some decisions here. Any particular BandWagon trinkets you'd love to have in your collection? Key rings, bucket hats, swizzle sticks, wall hangings? Sounds like there's a market for baseball caps anyway. Alyssa, my friend, you may have created a monster. Anyway, after this quick break, a message from someone who might as well be on the board of directors already. And as always, thank you for continuing to listen. To finish up this week, let's take the CODA.
For the CODA this week, an email I received last week. It's from my trio section guest, Doug Cooper, so go back and listen to that conversation again. It was the one about being a band parent and sending your kid to march with your alma mater college band. Yeah, we've all been there. In the last several weeks, Doug has offered me a couple of wise suggestions for ever improving the product, specifically with regard to people I can record conversations with for ever widening perspectives. Star Trek lists scientific advisors in its end credits. I'm starting to feel like I could list some content advisors, or certainly some friends of the program, and Doug is assuredly one of those. Anyway, he wrote, and I read. Hey, Rob. I was out of town last week, so I had a couple of episodes of BandWagon to catch up on. While I generally enjoy each episode, the interview/trio section with John Mange really knocked me over. My heart soared for the philosophical breakdown of why large ensemble music matters and how it can't, or ought not, be treated as a would-be-nice, shoestring-funded operation. I'm going to stream it again at least a couple more times, and I'll be taking notes. Frickin' awesome. That was still Doug writing. He continues, what John had to say sent my thoughts in a lot of different directions and reminded me of some of my favorite and equally jarring, in the positive sense, videos in my YouTube world/diet. I could set down a playlist of a dozen videos here, but I shared this one with you, which goes deep in that same direction as John's point on hegemony. It's a longish one, 45 minutes, but Adam Neely is one of my favorite YouTuber/content creators. He has a knack for balancing trained musician terminology and what that means outside that bubble. Thanks, signed, Doug. Doug, thank you. 3 things. 1, the link to that video is in the show notes, and it really is a thoughtful piece. That's Adam Neely, Neely. 2, the John Mange conversation is from 3 weeks ago, in episode 20. And 3, dear listener, if you have a thought about what you just heard, by which I mean anything you hear on the pod, and or if you have a thought about what you'd like to hear or what you think needs to be heard, by all means let me know. And predictably, the way you do that will be on display very shortly. Roll that jingle. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hamilton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at our website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using our email address, heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Or leave us a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that we do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to our news items, conversation topics, and my interview guests, so many of them, can be found in our show notes. Please share this show on social media with someone you think maybe hasn't heard it yet, and thank you for that, because word of mouth is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with us every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And please rate and review. It really helps other people to find the show. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton, and remember, surround yourself with good people. It makes you look better.